I witnessed this incident about 2 years ago when I was in Domino'S with my wife and kids. That incident took my soul out of me and my kids, but there was a twist that shocked us the most. Listen to my story and you will know on your own. The first phase of Corona struck New York City, and most people were getting infected, so the government restricted almost every public place, restaurant, and park. We were kind of living in fear of getting infected every day. I had great responsibilities upon me, and thanks to my luck that my work was completely IT-based, so the lockdown didn't affect my earnings too much. I was working from home and getting my income as usual. The only thing was that we were locked in our apartment for continuous 3 months. Finally, the first phase came to an end, and everything started to open slowly. The restrictions were also partially lifted, and now we could go outside. After being locked in our apartment, everyone wanted to go out and take some fresh air, but we had to be on alert because the threat was not over yet. It was the first day when the restrictions were lifted, and my family, especially my kids, started to force me to take them out. I was afraid to plan for any trip, but was helpless in front of them. I knew they had also been locked in the same cage for continuous 3 months, and now they wanted to fly. They were kids, and roaming around and playing was in their nature. But thanks to the lockdown, they missed the whole 3 months of waiting until the day when the lockdown would be lifted. Now it was the time, and they were begging me to take them out. I tried hard to convince them, but they didn't listen to me even once. Finally, my wife also came in with their support and said to me that she also wanted to go somewhere. I knew that we were in danger of being affected by Corona, so I was not ready to take them, but I had no other option. So I agreed, but on the condition that we would only go to some restaurant which was in the nearby area. They were not too happy, but they had no other option, so they agreed. I asked them to decide on the spot while I get fresh. I went to my room and got fresh. When I returned to the hall, my kids were running to me and told me that they had decided on the location. I asked them about it, and they told me that they wanted to go to the Domino'S, which was only a few miles away from my home. I agreed to this and asked them to get ready along with their mom. They were very happy and excited, so they changed into new clothes and returned back to me within 10 minutes. As usual, it was my wife who was late, as she took a lot of time getting ready. We waited for her, and after the next 15 minutes, she returned. I knew she made us wait too long, but after watching her, I thought my wait was worth it. She looked so beautiful that I kept on looking at her until my kids pulled my hand and asked me to go. We went to the parking lot, and from there to the Domino'S. I was not too far away, so we reached there in 10 minutes. We went there and grabbed a seat. I took the menu and asked my kids to select what they wanted. They told me their choice, and I ordered them. After ordering, I came back to my seat and waited for my order to be prepared. I was looking here and there when I noticed a girl sitting in another corner who looked stressed and was crying while hiding her face. I was looking at her, and when my wife noticed me, she asked me if something was wrong, and I told her about that girl. My wife was too kind, so she stood us up and went to that girl to ask her if something was wrong with her. She told her that she had a breakup with her boyfriend, and that's why she was sad. My wife calmed her down and made her believe that everything would be all right. After 5 minutes of chatting with her, she returned to us and explained everything to me. My kids were waiting desperately for their order to arrive, but it was taking too long. I went to the counter and asked them why my order was late. They replied that they were short-staffed and that if it was the first day to open after lockdown, they apologized to me and told me that they would prepare my order soon. I understood their problem because the pandemic had affected everyone equally. I went back to my seat and waited. I was looking at my phone when I heard some commotion. I looked outside and saw 2 guys running inside the store. They had pistols in their hands and were wearing masks to hide their faces. They came in and looked toward everyone, and just after that, they ran to the girl who was sitting in the corner. They went to her and grabbed her hair and threw her on the ground. I wanted to help that girl, but my wife stopped me. She was afraid because they had guns with them, and they could have harmed me or the kids, so I remained sitting there. They started slapping and kicking the girl. She was begging them to leave her, but they were merciless beasts. One of them held her by her neck, and the second one placed the gun on her chest. Before anyone could think anything, he pulled the trigger and banged. I couldn't believe my eyes. They actually shot that girl in front of my eyes. I looked toward my kids. They were completely scared and were shaking in their toes. I was also too scared. The girl was bleeding continuously, and they threw her into a corner and ran outside the store. I wanted to help the girl, but I was frozen in my seat and couldn't move my body. My wife shook me and asked me to call the cops. I thought that it would be a good idea and pulled out my phone to call the cops. But suddenly, I heard a voice that asked me to stop and not to call the police. I looked here and there to look for the lady who asked me to stop, and I was shocked to see that the girl who had been shot a moment ago was standing in front of me and asking me not to call the cops. I could clearly see that she was bleeding continuously, and her dress was soaked in blood. My wife stood up and held her, and asked whether she was okay or not, but she was completely okay and was smiling. I couldn't understand what was going on there. My wife asked her why she stopped them from calling the cops, and that was when she told us that what we saw a moment ago was just a play, and they were shooting a documentary for their project. I was surprised to hear that and couldn't believe my ears, but then I saw those two guys coming through the gate again, and this time without any mask. They were having a camera instead of a gun this time. They came and hugged the girl. After this, they explained the whole scenario and told us that they were brothers and sisters. Everyone except us in the store knew about this already, but they wanted to capture some real reaction from the audience, so they didn't tell us anything. They apologized to us for our inconvenience and for scaring us, and then left while thanking everyone there. I was in shock even now that what I was really scared of turned out to be a play, and that play almost took my soul out of my body. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. Domino's was the first place that I got to work in after getting laid off from my first job. It was one of the easiest places that I worked in, and I found it very easy for me. Now, it wasn't the very high-end job that I had before, but this time, working at Domino's was good for my mental health, and this was something that I really wanted. I was done with the high-end race and competitiveness, and I just wanted to take a break from all of that and just focus on some emotional growth. And this place seemed to be a fit, just right good. And so I stayed at this Domino's working the shifts because I did not want to break free from this relaxing work. It might have been tiring physically, but mentally everything was good. I was getting paid good enough, and being a cashier, I had much more privileges than the guys in the kitchen. And since we had 4 people working the shifts, the thing was pretty flexible and I was able to do whatever I want in the free time. And I decided to take up jujitsu lessons. It was something that I always wanted to do, so I decided to take jujitsu and work my way up to a black belt in it. I would do my hours at the Domino's and then straight away leave for jujitsu. It was pretty great to be able to work up a normal job and then leave to do something that I really loved. It kept my body and my mind both in check. Around a month into the job, I was working night shift. It was the night before Christmas, and I was working the shift for my friend since I didn't really have any plans for the Christmas. Our place opened at 7, so I was there early, waiting for everyone else to come in. And then when they came in, I saw that we were already very short-staffed. We were not planning on opening for the night, but since it was a Domino's and not a family business, we didn't really have any say in the matter. So we started making pizzas. And since it was the only decent pizza place in the city, we were getting the Christmas Eve rush, and people started coming in. And not just that, we were also getting the online deliveries racked upon one another. We only had one delivery guy, and it was getting hectic with people coming in and calling in. It was very busy, and the kitchen and the work environment in the kitchen was getting heated too. And because of the orders coming in, it was getting very problematic to keep the track of order. And even the people sitting in the place were getting impatient with their orders, while some were leaving. Some were just constantly shouting at us to hurry up, and I was busy apologizing for the delay. I forget to keep an eye in the kitchen, and things were getting way out of hand there. The kitchen staff was busy fighting each other because it was a chaos in there, and people outside weren't really helping. And then one of our workers snapped, and he burnt his hand and shouted, "Fuck!" which scared a lot of people. But there was this one dude. He was the customer, and he just wouldn't stop shouting at us and the staff, and was getting on the nerves of everyone in there. While everyone else was busy attending to the worker to dilute the situation, I just passed on the fresh garlic bread batch free of cost to everyone in the room. And when I gave that man the bread, he threw it from my hand and said, "I want my order, not this second-hand donation, asshole. Bring me my order." And I said very calmly, "It will be out, sir. Things are very busy and we are a bit short-staffed." And he replied, "Not my fucking problem." And I said, "I will be back with your order," and went away. I saw that he started harassing one of our injured staff members, saying mean things to me and using racial slurs at him from a distance. I said, "Sir, please stop harassing our employee." But he wouldn't buzz, and suddenly he started being physical with him and started slapping him on his head, pushing him to do his job. And when the employee retaliated, he took the gun out and raised it and said, "You don't have nothing to say, motherfucker, do you?" And that was the breaking point for me. I jumped over the counter, looked at the man, and I quickly approached him and he pointed the gun at me. Before he could, I used an Americana, one of the jiu-jitsu moves on him, and brought him down, disarming him. And then one of the people in the Domino's called the police and the man was apprehended. He had the courage to point the firearm in a public place and endanger so many lives around him. If I was not the one to act, I wonder what irrational decision he would have made. I'm just glad that I knew enough martial art to put him down. But then again, a gun most of the time, it won't really work. So keep your distance with sociopath like that. That night was long, but thankfully it ended without harming anyone. Well, anyone but one of our employees who got his hand burnt. But in the end, everyone was back at their house for Christmas in time. Though I definitely had something else in store for me. After closing the Domino's and on my way home, a car stopped in and a bunch of guys stepped out and beat the shit out of me. And one of them was the same guy from the altercation, the guy I took down. Turns out he had the pull in the police force and was let go with mere warning. They beat the light out of me, and I remember the last thing he said. "Not so tough now, huh, pizza boy?" From that day and today, I wished I crossed roads with him again. I bet he wouldn't want to cross me right now that I have the black belt. I come from a South Asian country where it's kind of unsafe for a girl to go out on solo adventures. That being said, there are some states which are relatively safe. 2019 had been a rough year for me. But by October, I'd started feeling better and decided to take a solo trip for my birthday. I spoke to some friends and decided to head to the small village down south. My brother helped convince my overprotective mother as he'd already been there. But to put her mind at ease, I decided to grab some pepper spray. Unfortunately, we couldn't find one, so I kept a bottle of deodorant and a knife handy. I decided to stay there for 5 days and booked a room at a guest house for only 2 days, thinking I would check out this guest house that my friend had suggested and hopefully spend the remainder of my stay there. To tell you a little more about this village, it's a hippie paradise if you know what I mean. Everyone is extremely friendly and warm, and they have tourists coming from all over the globe. Once I got to the run, I was a little paranoid because it seemed a little dingy. Forget about security systems, the latch on the door was barely functional. The first night was a bit unsettling, but nothing happened. The next day was my birthday, so I rented a bike and went out exploring the village. Sometime after lunch, I decided to check out the guest house that my friend had recommended, which was a little secluded, but extremely peaceful. As I reached there, I was greeted by the owner who showed me around this place. Had big cuts on one side and a small row of rooms on the opposite side. I decided to take the latter, as it was much cheaper, and I didn't plan on being in the room much anyway. We exchanged numbers and I told him I'd move in the next day. The next day, I got there and had lunch with the owner, and he told me about the history of the place and a bit about himself. I realized that he wasn't around when my friend had been there. I was trying to read him, see if I was getting creepy vibes from him, since I was going to be spending 2 nights there, but I didn't see any red flags in particular. After lunch, I went to a restaurant that was right behind the guest house. I met some of the locals whom I was already acquainted with. Along with them, there were 2 new guys, one of whom was from the city. The 3 of us instantly clicked and started hanging out. Once it got dark, we came back to my guest house to chill. When the older told us that he was planning a bonfire with some of his guests/friends who were sitting at another table. An hour passed, we played cards, and the guys didn't seem like they were much in the mood for bonfire and left shortly after. So the owner had already set things up. We decided to spend some time by the fire with them. We were all sitting and chatting until midnight, when the other 2 boys decided to take off as they weren't staying there. I told the owner that I headed back to my room too. He tried to convince me to stay out a bit longer, but I didn't want to be alone with him. My room door had 4 to 5 locks, but only 2 of them worked, so I locked them and realized that the windows facing each other did not have any panes, and the curtains were made of scraps of cloth, which meant that anyone could peek inside to see everything. So I went to the bathroom to change and clean up. As soon as I stepped out and started rummaging through my bag, I heard someone whisper my name twice. My heart skipped a beat and I froze for a few seconds. I decided to ignore it and quickly turned out all the lights. Before going to bed, I decided to keep the bin right in front of the door in case someone tried to open it. At least that would make noise. I took out my deodorant and knife and kept it right next to me on the pillow before laying in bed. I kept looking at both of the windows on the side to see if anyone was out there. About an hour and a half later, the metallic door started rattling violently, as if someone was trying to force it open. Instantly, I stood up and got a hold of the knife and deodorant. My mouth went dry and my heart started beating fast. I didn't know if I should scream because I only knew of one other girl who was staying in the opposite heart. After what felt like forever, the door stopped shaking and I collapsed onto the bed. I checked the windows to see if anyone was walking by, but no one did. I tried to think of what it could have been. Maybe it was the wind, but the curtains hadn't moved from one bit. It had to have been a person. I don't know when, but I passed out soon after. I wake up around 6 a.m. to see that it was almost bright outside. I closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep. But when it started happening again, frantically, I shot up in bed, ready to attack. But once again, it stopped after a few minutes. I didn't even understand what was happening. Was it even real? I went closer to the door and got to look at the bin that I had kept by the door that had moved away from its original position. Yes, something had definitely happened. Not knowing what to do, I opted to go back to sleep. When I got out of the room later, I tried to read the owner's face, but it was just as hard to read as the day before. What worried me the most was that I had to spend another night in that room. I decided to not let that thought spoil the day, and went out with the 2 friends I'd made for a track, and then watched the sunset from the hilltop where all the locals gathered to play music in the evenings, including the owner. My new friends and I were somewhere else after that, and at around 10, I decided to head back to the guest house for dinner. As I was nearing the pool, I got a text from the owner asking me where I was. I didn't think much of it because it was late, and he was probably wondering if I was safe. I didn't reply as we were almost there. When we sat down on the futon, the owner said I was just about to text you, and showed me the message he typed on his phone. I was just thinking about you read the message. I'm not sure what that meant. So I looked at his face trying to read him and realized he was doing the same. I tried to act normal and told him where we were. We all met a couple of other people we smoked. At around 11, the guys decided to head to their guest house. At that point, I got up and told him I was going to my own room. He looked at the time and asked me why I was ending the night so early. I told him I was tired from all the walking and that I wanted to be up early. He didn't push any further because there were other people around. I went back to the room filled with anticipation and dread, but thankfully nothing happened that night. The next day I checked out, but my boss wasn't until 5 p.m. I didn't want to be left alone with the owner. So I met up with the guys leaving my luggage at the reception, which was also the eating area. When I came back, I picked up my bag, thanked him, and left. I still have no idea if it was the owner or the only helper that I'd seen around whoever it was trying to forcefully get through my door. Let's not meet.